Welcome there guys to today's video where I'll be discussing the pros and cons of studying in Europe and then maybe touch on how it was for me to study in Egypt, which a lot of people are very curious about. So I typically get quite a few messages every week whereby people are asking me, is it worth going abroad and studying in Egypt? And my typical response to that is usually, unless you know the language and you're okay with the culture, it's not really the ideal location for people to go out and study dentistry and medicine for that matter as well. My recommendation is always for people to go over to Europe, especially for my UK viewers out there and the guys that might want to be coming back to the UK to study. Why is that? Now this is something that I've mentioned before, but I'll mention it again. When you study dentistry in EU, especially from the list of exempt countries as well, you'll be able to skip the ORE exam, which is an exam that's quite difficult. It's very well known for being difficult to get onto. You have to pay quite a high price for, and it can take a few years as well, just simply because the waiting list is so huge. To avoid that, having a degree from an EU country that is exempt and from a university that is recognized means that you really do save a lot of time. Now the downside to it is usually that the EU universities come with a higher tuition fee on a yearly basis. But if you start doing the math, you'll start realizing that the 2 or 3 years that you're not working because you're waiting for your ORE and the money that you put towards the ORE, which can be around 10,000 British pounds, it actually works out to be better in the long run to just take the hit financially in the 5 or 6 years that you might do in Europe at an EU university than it is to do it a bit quicker maybe in Egypt for a cheaper price, but then you're not working for 2 or 3 years and then you're obviously having to pay for the ORE, etc. And you may not pass the first time. These are major considerations to take before making your step into dentistry, be it in EU or in Egypt. Now, what is it like studying in the EU? Well, for me, I've had two sort of EU experiences, one being in Ukraine, which one can say is an EU country or not in terms of dentistry. On the list itself, it is not an exempt country from the ORE, meaning that if you do complete your degree in Ukraine, you will have to still take the ORE. So that's a major disadvantage of studying in that country. Now, one of the upsides to it is the fact that it's only a 5-year course compared to where I am now in Slovakia, where I'm doing a 6-year course. And then if you were to compare it with Egypt, that's also a 5 + 1 year course, meaning you have to do 5 years for the actual degree itself. But to obtain the degree in hand, you need to do 1 year's worth of internship, which a lot of people just do in Egypt anyway. So that's how it works in terms of the amount of years necessary for all of the countries. Now, if we were talking about tuition fees, Ukraine is the cheapest out of all of them. I believe I was paying about £2,000 or £3,000 British, of course, per year for the Ukrainian degree in itself. And then for Egypt, combining everything together is about 6,000 to 7,000 British pounds for everything per year as a tuition fee cost. And the most expensive one is the one where I'm at now in Slovakia, and it's about 11,000 or 11,500 euros per year. So when you convert that down, it's about 9,500-ish pounds per year. The most expensive one is this one. However, like I said, I will be exempt from sitting the ORE, which is great news for me. Living costs, if we were to discuss that, Ukraine again is relatively cheap, but still more expensive than Egypt, believe it or not. So Egypt wins this round, whereby it's super cheap. Like if you're coming from an EU country or from the UK, you'll find Egypt being extremely cheap. But again, as I mentioned right at the beginning, if you're not comfortable with the culture and the language, you will struggle there and it will take you back. So if you are planning to stay there for 5 or 6 years, you will have to have thick skin for doing so and be prepared for such a different vibe entirely. I'm not saying it's bad, but people will be shocked by it. Now with Slovakia, I have found, surprisingly, it's the most expensive country by a mile. It actually puts England to shame at times. So when I go back home, I feel as though things are cheaper. So Slovakia, especially Košice, where it is a student-centric town, the prices are just jacked up massively. So be aware of this, that the house prices are quite high. It's just not cheap. Yes, you can walk around to places and you can get a bicycle and just cycle to places as well. But generally, it's very expensive. The upside to that is you learn how to cook, which I've started doing as well, which helps massively. But generally, you are going to be pegged back and feel a bit more closed off with the amount of things that you could do in comparison to, say, Ukraine or Egypt. Now, the style of study for each of them, I would say Ukraine is definitely at the bottom of the list here. Most of our classes were switched over to online classes and then remained online even when COVID had kind of relaxed itself, because I was in Ukraine during the COVID period. So they do take a lot of shortcuts. And what I found with the university that I was at was that they don't really like to incorporate dentistry in their mainstream teaching methods. And then if you complete that degree, you will then do a specialism which lasts 3 years. And during that 3 years, that's when you get your practical experience. Now, for people that are from the UK again, or from the EU, they don't want an 8-year degree just to get their hands on patients. It doesn't make any sense. So really and truly, if you're going there just for the degree and want to come back and do the ORE, keep one thing in mind. You're going to struggle when it comes to the practical side of things. You'll find that clinical experience is just not available for you. And one thing I had to do personally was reach out to private tutors to teach me how to work on dummy heads, for example. So it is tough if you're going to go out to Ukraine. But again, people do it just for the sake of getting the degree and then getting back to the UK and doing the ORE. So if that's the route you want to take, fair play to you. In Egypt, the level of education is probably top-notch, in my opinion, out of all three of them, the highest. Closely followed by here in Slovakia. But the practical work that you get out there is just phenomenal. You are constantly working with patients. The way that Egypt works is that the healthcare provided by the state is essentially provided by students. So people are happy to go into these hospitals whereby there are students working on them. That includes dentistry as well. And a lot of people will come in, doesn't matter what the problem is, they will know that they're going to be treated by students, so their expectations aren't through the roof either. And you will feel a lot more comfortable and confident working on these patients, knowing that the risk is low. Of course, we're not out there trying to kill people, but at the same time, you will not feel as though there is a lot at stake here, because your professors will help you out as well. Now, with that in mind, so many people walking through the door, you also have a lot of students working, which means that it can be quite hectic. So it will be a case of you might be working with 20 other people in your class and only 1 or 2 professors helping to supervise. So this can be quite daunting as well, because a lot of the time you're going to be left working on your own. And couple this with the fact that you're in a foreign country where the language is different, the culture is different. These things do start adding up to the level of stress that you'll endure while you're doing your clinical rotations. So although the experience is great, it is very hard to get used to it and accustomed to it all, while there's a million patients sort of shouting and you know, bundling you in the clinics, and you have to just deal with it. So the upside to it, at the end of it, you'll be a very accomplished dentist when you return to a place like the UK. But of course, you'll have to do the RE first. Now, here in Slovakia, I would say I'm in my 3rd year again here, and there hasn't been any clinical work per se as yet. However, in the 4th year onwards, we will be working with patients, and I've sort of fact-checked this myself by going to a couple of 4th year classes and seeing that they do interact with patients. So we have our own hospital dedicated to dental work, and the patients will come in. You will sit down as a student with a professor and maybe 2 or 3 other students maximum. So it's a very nice, intimate class space where you get to work with the patient in a controlled environment. So it's a lot slower than it would be in Egypt and a lot more controlled. And you will learn everything from a hands-on approach that will really help you out. So it's like a middle ground between Ukraine and Egypt, whereby you get a happy medium. You're working with patients. Maybe not as many as you would in Egypt, but of course enough to give you the hands-on experience you need to be a good enough dentist to start your foundation year back in a place like the UK in the future. I would say that I've had the most fun out in Egypt just because of the culture and the life, and I was happy to adjust to that. The friends that I made out there were awesome. I would say the guys that I met in Ukraine were also great. I had a massive UK-based cohort, so that made life very easy to adjust. And here in Slovakia, again, like I've said before, it does feel like a middle ground. There's people from different international backgrounds. It does still feel like home in the UK because of its EU connection. So for anybody out there who's looking to make a decision, if you're purely based on budget, then of course Ukraine might suit you. If you're happy with the culture shock, then it might be Egypt for you all day long. But then if you're looking for that happy medium where you can just go in, and if I had to advise anyone, my personal advice would just be go to somewhere like Slovakia or Bulgaria, Romania, Poland, etc. Because you skip that whole bulk of doing the ORE, which could set you back years, cost you more in the long run. And it's just a faff. You don't want to be finishing uni and then thinking, I have to now do something else to actually register as a dentist in the UK. And if I have any regrets, it's the fact that I didn't find this place sooner and that I've been essentially wasting years just to get where I wanted to get. So my advice to everybody out there, pick somewhere where you can just streamline your education, get out and get into the real world. We're just trying to be dentists. If you need any advice, feel free to get in touch with me and I can give you as much as you want for free. Of course, I'm not charging anything for the advice that I give. I'm just happy to help. And either way, good luck with everything that you do. Hopefully you can share your stories in the near future and I'll see you on the next one. Take care guys. Bye bye.